Welcome to this week's edition of Inter-University Debate, which is brought to you by Center for Constitutional Governance and Civic Space TV. Inter-University Debate is a platform where university students are able to discuss matters that affect the country, the region, and the world at large. And today we are discussing something that affects the region. It affects the regional integration, and that is the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And we are going to discuss about how it affects the regional integration of the East African region. Joining with me to discuss this topic are students of Mbarara University of Science and Technology. You're welcome to the Inter-University Debate.
Thank you.
Okay, so for over 25 years, for decades, Democratic Republic of Congo has had several conflicts ongoing. The United Nations recently stated that it has had over 122 rebel groups. This Democratic Republic of Congo is the second largest country in Africa and the world's 11th largest country. Now we sit down with students of Mbarara University of Science and Technology and discuss several issues surrounding this conflict. To start with, we are going to look at the background of the conflict, the different conflicts. Where did they even come from? What is the historical background? Is it deeply rooted in history? Is it about ethnicity? Is it about the neighbors? We are going to look at that. How about the intervention from the EAC itself? Has it intervened as EAC into the conflict? We are going to look at that as well. The issue of Rwanda and Uganda intervening in the affairs of Democratic Republic of Congo, specifically on the issues of the conflict. We are going to discuss that as well. How about what future does the EAC hold with the different countries which are member states of the EAC having conflicts? How should the EAC handle this? Should the EAC start vetting different countries that apply to join it, in that before you join the EAC, you should first handle the conflicts in your country? We'll get the students' opinion on that. Is it time to have international intervention, for example, from Britain or any other country? Is it time that we should invite the Western world or any other country to resolve matters within the EAC? We will discuss that as well. But before we delve into that discussion, let me introduce the panelists. And I'll start with the gentleman on my extreme left, and that is Mr. Okello, Jerome. Jerome is pursuing Bachelor of Science in Accounting and Finance. Jerome, you're welcome to the Inter-University Debate.
Thank you, and I'm very pleased to be here.
Okay. Our second panelist is seated right next to Jerome, and that is Ms. Nakulima Denise Madrine. Madrine is pursuing Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Engineering. You're welcome to the Inter-University Debate.
Thank you, and it's my pleasure to be here.
Okay. Our third panelist is Ms. Akankunda Mackline. She's pursuing Bachelor of IT. You're welcome to the Inter-University Debate.
Thank you so much, and I'm glad to be here.
Okay. Our fourth panelist is seated right next to me, and that is Mr. Ricky Mugume Kasheija. He is pursuing Bachelor of Science in Physiotherapy.
Thank you so much. I look forward to the discussion. Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, I'm very glad that our panel is gender balanced. So thumbs up to Mbarara University of Science and Technology. You know, as Inter-University Debate, we normally try as much as possible to have our discussions gender balanced. So as I introduced, we are discussing the conflict in Congo and how it impacts on the regional integration. By regional integration, I mean the East African community, the integration of the Eastern Bloc of Africa. So let's kickstart this discussion, and I'll start right with Jerome.
Thank you.
So, Jerome, as I mentioned, the UN stated that the rebel groups are over 122 in the past 25 years in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So take us through the background of the conflicts in Congo.
Yeah, thank you. A pleasant day for you all. To go straight to the point, as the way you and I said it, we are had or we are having like approximately 122 rebel groups that have originated in Congo. But for us to understand how this originated, you have to take it back to the times of the since colonialism started. You notice that when the whites came in, or when our colonialists came in and found that Congo was a landmine of resources, better than any other country, any other African country around, it was really a point of arousal. But because of our pursuit for independence and after the death of their first president, who was actually assassinated, I think his body was recently brought back, I think last year, something like that. That is like the first foundation that showed that there is a political disarray in Congo itself. Now, with the destruction of their president, comes in different people that are trying to rule or trying to build Congo to maybe a country that can stand for itself and build, but none of them have a vision. Probably when President Mobutu, around the 1990s, 1980s, where he tried to create freedom for the people. He brought up freedom for the Congolese so that they enable themselves have a stand on how they can build up themselves socially, culturally, economically. And in his way, he started trying to bring up various integrations or going out to other countries to integrate so that they can build themselves economically. He tried forming up the economic community of the Great Lakes region. He tried getting into SADC. He tried getting into ECOWAS and COMESA. But that was just short term, because he died later on, leading to the rise of Kabila, President Kabila. But with the rise of President Kabila, that is where things really went amiss. Because with President Kabila's rise, with the support of Rwanda and Kenya, he disrupted them, or he chased them away later on, however much they helped him come up to power. And with that, he formed up a security pact with SADC. It was not necessarily good for economic benefit, it was just for political reasons. And in doing so, it kind of aggravated the people around. That means it's now starting to create conflicts within internally and externally. And in the process, that is where you experience a second war or the second conflict within internal conflict within the people of Congo and the rebels. Now, with such aggregations that are coming in, it keeps on building itself. Even after chasing Rwanda itself, you notice now Rwanda takes over Kivu region after the breakdown or the fall of the economic community of the Great Lakes region, which meant that Kivu was a very economic stand place, and it was detrimental for Congo, and it created more conflicts within Rwanda itself and Congo. And the rebels also the people felt that their land is being taken, or their economic activities or their resources are being taken. It keeps on building up on the fact that now their government has betrayed them and they feel they have it better. Why not take in arms, get into guerrilla warfare and bring up and take us, like let us be the ones to create our own situation. In that, you notice that comes in 1994 when Rwanda has the genocide. With the support of the Tutsi that are in Congo, they supported some of the Tutsi that are in Congo, and was massive bloodshed. The relations kept on dwindling. But you're seeing that its conflict is rising. But that is just internally of itself. You also notice the other countries around. Since Congo is a landmine of resources, everyone wants to have part of that share. It has the Katanga region, which is a massive sum of minerals. It has a Kivu region, the one that Rwanda has. It's a place full of Mugule forests and all that is just perfect timber in all forms. It also has the Congo Basin, a perfect place for agriculture and minerals itself. And each and every country in a sense that wants to get it has to get in that kind of lion's share. And if you look at it, Congo's political army is down. It doesn't have people who have a political will, or having people that are ready enough to undergo the integrations or formulations that may and take up this integration strongly and take into maybe development in the country. It was not there. They don't have that political will. And with that kind of detriment arising, why wouldn't I, if I was a resident of Congo per se, I would form my own army and be like, my country is betraying me. It has led other economic other integrations or economic communities come into my country. SADC at one point was owning part of Katanga politically, not even the country itself. Like, I would form a rebel army of myself to try to fight it. And if that keeps on, it means she made form an army, Indian made form an army. This is why the rebel armies kept on coming in. And for now, with the conflict with Rwanda right now, that is resulting from the ADF and M23, that is a result that is from a long time grievance from the land that was taken of Chivu. Maybe it has been brought back, but still there's that grievance. The support of the Tutsi genocide was heavy. And if by the time someone says you're supporting, well, that is detrimental. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jerome. That was an in-depth insight into the background of the conflict in DRC. Let me move to Denise.
Yes.
So, Denise, Jerome has given us the historical background.
Yes.
Now, my question to you is, what is the current status quo of the conflict?
All right. So before we actually dive into the status quo, it's important to understand that Congo, throughout its years of endless political unrest, it has taken long for too long. Like, it has been there for too long, over 25 years, as you had initially stated. So that means we have had various crises that have happened over the years. So it means whoever has come into government has carried on this burden from where you go. We're from, I think the background you have just got from my fellow panelist, Jerome. So we see from there that we have had all this progressing. We have had, of course, various efforts being made to try to calm this down, to curb it rather. But still, at the end of the day, we are seeing this progressing and progressing. To the recently, I think the recent conflict between DRC and Rwanda, you talk about the M23 and the ADF. So there have been allegations that these rebels have been funded by Rwanda and Uganda, respectively, in that order. So that shows, with such allegations, in a country that has already been facing crises, in the particular manner of the different number of rebels that have existed, like we have, of course, the major one, we have the tip of the iceberg, which are these two groups, which have existed and existed and existed with numerous allegations of the support they get. So currently what we have is Rwanda and DRC. I think I would call it the gist of the matter. They had what I would call a crossfire on allegations that Rwanda has been funding the M23 rebels who have been disturbing the DRC civilians. Secondly, also the ADF rebels, they claim that these have been funded by Uganda to disturb the DRC civilians. So the current status quo in itself is quite well, if we keep on heading like this for a country like DRC, that of course is a landmine of resources, you see it's going to have a very detrimental end in the long run, because we see that lack of the political unrest that they have already, with then a lot of external, what I would call allegations, and all those external forces that they assume that are making an impact, like all of them being merged to come out with a status quo that at the end of the day is not only affecting its neighbors, but you look at the civilians who have died. Women have been raped, kids have been killed. Like, the current status quo right now is, I would call it sickening, and it's really a sorrowful state to be in for a country like DRC that hasn't had rest when it comes to stability for over the years. So this means they have been left in a position of continual, instability, having to move here and there, having different rebel groups, having all this taking place in a country that, of course, because when you look at DRC, you would think if it's a landmine of resources, then you would think it would imply that its civilians and the country itself should be at a way above, because I think the untapped resources in DRC right now can weigh up to $24 trillion, but it's untapped because of the stability and all those things. So for the status quo itself that is like that, it makes it quite hard for a region like DRC to be outstanding, to invite in investors. Like the economic growth, the prosperity, socially and even politically, is right now in a position that is very hard, like for a country like DRC to escape. Leaving everyone is willing to engage in the status quo, questionable, and how best can they do it to improve the status quo and put it somewhere else?
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Denise. Let me move to Mackline. So, Mackline, I know some of the causes have already come out from both Denise and Jerome. So, what are the other underlying causes of this so many conflicts and so many rebel groups in the DRC?
Thank you so much. Yeah, as the previous panelists have stated, of course, we are seeing so very many, okay, I will not say so very many causes, but I'm going to point out the major causes of this conflict. First of all, I'm going to base on the resources. As we've been told before, DRC has very many resources. And even these people who are all looking at DRC, they're not looking at DRC. Even those people, as someone stated, we're looking at people who are coming in to help resolve the conflict. But my question is to you and to the House: are they coming in to really help, or they're coming in for their selfish motives? And to me, I would answer that as they're coming in for their selfish motives, because the fact that DRC is a resourceful country, it has very many resources. As you have seen, the Katanga region, which is endowed with a lot of gold and so many other resources, people are coming in to offer a hand in return of the resources. So it being a very resourceful country leaves it at a very bad set of inviting so very many people who are coming in to exploit it instead of helping it. And the other point is, you're looking at the poor governance. Yes, we've seen leaders in the DRC who are not really aiming at providing the peace in the country, but even those, I'm going to give an example of those who are trying to join the, okay, of course, integration is going to come in, right? So those who are trying to join these groups, the integration groups, talk about the COMESA, the SADC, they're not joining because they want to really attain the motive of integration, but rather for their greed for power. We are coming because, yes, DRC is under conflicts, but you are coming to join this integration so that you can help me take on power, not help the country. So when they help to gain their power, all other motives for helping the country are forgotten. And that is how we see a repeat of conflict in DRC. Yeah. Then the other point would be the continued, okay, the increase in the rebels itself. The fact that they have resources, the rebels keep sponsoring themselves. Okay, this one would come in like there is corruption, eh? So instead of me coming, I'm coming to help the country resolve the conflict. I come in, give people money and exploit them. Go. So we are not going to see a safe or a peaceful DRC with these resources that are within before we sit as a whole to resolve, like to decide what are we going to do for DRC, because this will keep repeating itself, as I may say. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me move to Ricky. So Ricky, why DRC? It has so many rebel groups. Why DRC? Why not Algeria, Nigeria, Uganda? DRC has surpassed that level. There are so many rebel groups in the DRC. Even Uganda, when we had the conflict in the north, when Joseph Kony interfaced with the UPDF, he was pushed and he ran into Congo. Why has it habited so many rebel groups?
I think the question is why not? Because to be honest, let's start from the perspective of DRC. What is a normal day for a DRC civilian or citizen? What is their day-to-day like? Because for over the 25 years of conflict, I don't think any of them has seen a normal day, or even their definition of normal is what we would call normal for a country that has been at peace for some time. Therefore, why not DRC? Why not run to DRC in case you're in conflict? Because the terrain alone in DRC is enough to hide any person. The road networks in DRC are not really the best. I don't know if any of us here has been to DRC, but the road network is a nightmare. They don't have a proper airport. they do not, literally the means in and out of the country, the security within the borders is also still at risk. So this is a country that is easy to access, a country that has fought for so many years that their priorities have changed from what we would have as normal priorities. We have border control in Uganda, Rwanda, ESC generally. They do not have that. Because the things they are facing are, how do we survive to live the next day without necessarily looking at the nitty-gritties of who crossed the border at which time? Because there are so many entry points into DRC and without control compared to any other country we've seen. So yes, DRC has the leeway to have a different rebel groups. But then again, going back to the normal day of a civilian, everyone wishes for a life that's different from what they've already had. Now, this is much so the case in DRC because you cannot give birth to your child. Let's start from the point when you're given birth to and you were born into war and you're fighting war and you have children who are also going to be fighting war. So the idea is that every single person would like to see a change. Therefore, if that change is not being delivered by the government you hope so much would do so, and they're not doing that, certainly at some point you feel the frustration and you want to take on the mantle. So obviously, it all goes down to the idea that Mackline was bringing up, the idea of selfish gains. I believe everyone is selfish. Selfish to the point that you want a better life for yourself. And if no one's going to give it to you, if you're not aligned to the causes that the different rebel groups have already, and you have your own, of course, you're going to go down. You're, of course, with or without the support from outside influence, allegedly, it goes down to the idea that how best can you present yourself with the things that you need? Is it a war that you're going to fight in order to get it? Because ideally, we all fight war every day. You wake up early in the morning, go to work, go to class, because that is a war you have to fight in order to get something you want. And sadly, it is literal war for people in DRC. So we're not looking at rebel groups as people who are trained in some camp of soldiers. These are day-to-day people who put down the hoes and pangas and pick guns up and go out to fight. So ideally, it is what do we want for ourselves that is not being provided to us. And those go down to the interests we have individually. And secondly, why I feel is more, we have more of these rebel groups is because the intercommunication. I feel like we have the opposition and the opposition parties in Uganda able to sit down on one table and say, okay, we have a government, we are the opposition, we are different interests, but we have a similar goal because we belong to the opposition. That is not the case with DRC. Opposition could look like the 122 rebel groups they already have. That is their opposition. But if that opposition had a table, a platform to sit on and communicate, I believe we could have fewer rebel groups. But because that's not the case, the communication, the presence, the placement of those rebel groups within the country, and also the vast land of the country has to be taken into account. That these rebel groups are not concentrated in one area, they're spread over. So yeah, that's it.
Okay. Thank you so much. Let me get back to Jerome.
Yes, please.
So, still looking at the causes,
Yes, please.
what is your perspective on the neighboring countries? Do you think there are contributory factors from the neighboring, especially the ones that are within the EAC?
Yes, please. Looking at the causes and the neighboring countries, yes, they are really part of the causes of the conflicts in Congo. Because now, let me use my own fellow country here, Uganda. What benefit will it be if I go and sponsor another rebel country to go and continue conflict in a different country that I know is an immediate neighbor to me, yet it can be economically standing than me? Or let me use an example of like my friend here, or my fellow panelist, Denise here. If I know she's my neighbor and she's like economically, potentially very well going to be better than me, I'll look for ways to bring her down as a country, because if she's a country that is better than me, I'm going to face it rough at one point. There are either two choices I have to decide: become a sheep in a wolf's skin, or become a snake in a wolf's skin. Either way, I'll have to get resources and I'll have to do so. Or Rwanda, for example, it is part of the EAC and it has exported a lot to Congo. UN reported around, I think, 23 billion exports in terms of crops in terms of crops, food and all that to Congo. Yet at the same time, it's still fighting because Congo has a good it has a good economic region and resource ground that it can still use to develop itself the more. So if a country is in conflict, it means they're not going to really look at who is entering the border, as my fellow panelist Ricky had said. Who is entering the border? Who is giving me security? No, they're looking at how am I supposed to stop that leader or that rebel that is fighting to protect the country. They're not going to look at me who is going to come and I begin scraping for gold to build my country better. No, they're not going to. So the best way is like part of our countries, yes, them being part of East African community. For starters, actually, want to be integrated into a community that is majorly for trade is for trade only and economic resources. I'm not entering it because we want to become friends. No. When you enter a friendship, you have to give me benefits. And the benefit with Congo is it has resources. And if I've entered it, it means I'm going to look for ways of getting that resource. Whether it's an integration, whether it's not an integration, I'll still get it. So we as the neighboring countries play part of that role to the conflicts.
Okay, yes, Ricky.
I think I beg to differ. For cases of countries, neighboring countries, because I think that argument would work best for countries like the USA, which obviously in the past has had a hand in the wars or the conflict within DRC. I feel for countries like Uganda and Rwanda, it's more of who would agree with me most. Because here we are looking at regional integration, and even if it's not regional integration, but the idea of peace amongst ourselves that can harbor trade. Because you have to think bigger, you have to think for a longer term. For example, Rwanda would consider business with DRC a success. But DRC at war right now, obviously we are not refuting the fact that people, including the neighbors, have gone in for selfish gains, the short-term gains. But I think it should be more than that. The idea that if a country close to me is at peace, then chances are we hope to work together for better ends, much richer gains. Because Uganda in the past has actually drawn the short straw. We've had to take care of the Ebola cases in DRC. We've had to harbor the refugees from DRC. And these are all resources that would have been used for something else in the growth of Uganda, but we have used on a different country. So the idea of peace can come at a cost of us picking and having a hand in who sits in the seat of power, especially in the neighbors around us. Because we've had rumors of different East African countries trying to interfere with the elections in Uganda because of what can happen, who would present better chances of trade if they were in power, that kind of trade.
Okay, let me just ask you something in there. So, do you think it is okay for countries within the EAC especially to have an intervention on political affairs of another country that is within the EAC?
Whether it is right or okay, I think may not be relevant in this case. But what I think is how far does the charter allow us as ESC to intervene? Because I think this goes down to the agreements we have amongst ourselves, because we cannot sit down and decide, because I know initially ESC was composed of 3 countries. These are countries, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, sitting on the same table and deciding, okay, this can pass and this will not pass. Even as far as we've come since 1999, we've come to see that, okay, now I can travel to Kenya with just a national ID, no need for a passport or visa. And the question is, how far can we take it? How far does our charter allow us? Because if we decide that it's okay for us to intervene in politics of Kenya and then intervene with politics of Congo, then what would stop us from intervening with Rwandan politics the next time they have an election? So I think it's just crossing that slippery slope and knowing how far we can go and being able to keep it on ground, lest we, topple ourselves in the end.
Okay, before I bring Denise, let me just ask Ricky one more question in that aspect. Because when you look at the charter, it does not provide for any country interfering into the affairs of any other country. So my question would be, in the absence of such a provision, in the name of peace and trade, like you put it, do you think it is okay in the absence of that provision for a country to intervene and say, you know what, these things have to be in order in your country because it will affect my interest and that of my citizens in the long run?
One of the pillars of any integrational bloc is peace and security. So the question now goes down to what means of peace and security are we going to employ in this case? Because if you're going to choose to fight on behalf of the government, which has agreed with you, the legal government, then I feel it's okay. Because if today Kenya got a rebel group and Uganda was to step in, by law, Uganda would have to fight on behalf of the Kenyan government, just like the Ugandan government was fighting on behalf of the Somalian government at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, so it has to be in a legal capacity, because you cannot choose and pick any rebel group that you feel should sit in power, then you fight on their behalf. That's basically you picking someone who doesn't sit on the same table with you, and you're fighting the person who sits on the same table with you. So that makes it a little bit complicated, because any of these things can go around back to any country within the EAC. So we have to find legal means in order to fight on behalf of the government.
Okay, I see Denise has something to say.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to add on what Ricky said, because at the end of the day, what we have, I think, for the last 25 is a unique case of DRC. Unlike other East African countries or countries in the EAC, we haven't had that much conflict in any of these countries. So that means we have a special case, which is DRC, where it's not guaranteed that if this conflict, rather, where it's probable that if a conflict, these conflicts and rebel groups keep on increasing like that, that outbreak can, rather, such impacts of such rebel groups can spread out to these other East African communities. It's very probable, and it has been anticipated. It means, in the long run, the political unrest in DRC is going to have an impact on the ESC communities, rather the countries, the member states. So that means either way, if we want it or not, it might be a double-edged sword in some way around. So that means we should find a mutual ground on which we can stop this. So with having the first case scenario as DRC being in conflict for a long time, that means we can do it for the very first time. And as the East African member states, for the first one time, we engage in DRC politics in order to end this. Because unless it ends, if it doesn't end, there's a risk this is going to come to us. Secondly, if we say we're not engaging, still the risk is there. So it's like a time bomb. Anytime it can explode. So the question is, how best can we commit? Of course, you shouldn't intervene in the politics of another country independently. You should either be on their side or not intervene. But if the risk that we are facing by letting this go on is potential enough to cause political unrest in our countries, then I might beg to differ and I say we can potentially engage. Because Congo alone, with those various rebel groups, you know the minerals that they have. So they can potentially exploit the minerals as rebels and fund their ammunition, fund their armory. It means they can potentially one day wake up and they decide to come to Uganda. And now this conflict is shifting to Uganda, or go to Rwanda or Burundi, and it can shift to the entire EAC. So that means if we can make a stand as the East African member states and we decide to engage and stop this conflict that has failed to stop for over the years, then we should take up the mantle and engage there.
Okay. Before I bring in Mackline, Denise, just one more question.
Yes.
So in a scenario where the government of a country says, I don't want your intervention,
Yes.
do you think it is still okay for the sake of peace in the region for other countries within the EAC to still intervene?
Because like my fellow panelists said, Ricky, that the position where DRC is that it has lost what I would call priority. What would be ideal priorities for a democratic state are no longer its priorities. It means it is in a desperate state, because in many times it has joined these integrations with the sole purpose of security. It means where it is right now, even though it would have told you I do not want it, it's very minimal. It can tell you it doesn't want, because it has been the card it has played, a desperate card to attain security. So it means it's already in a desperate position that if someone says they do not want you to intervene, you would question why they have said they do not want. That might be a selfish reason. But seeing it and the cards it has been playing, Jane and Sadak and Komesa, it means it is desperate enough to have what I would call bare minimum of peace in its country, a normal day with the normal priorities. So it means in the state it is, we can agree as East African, the ESC, since it's our youngest member state, and we intervene, because their peace guarantees our peace.
Okay, thank you. So moving to Mackline, we are still talking about the EAC. Now, the conflict in Congo, as we have heard from the panelists, it has some sort of a spillover effect. And now we see Rwanda, we see Uganda. So what does this mean for the integration of EAC?
What does it mean for integration? Thank you so much. So I'll still agree with the two parties. To me, I think the integration, first of all, we have to look at the objectives. What are the major objectives for the integration? That's the first key point. And in those objectives, we have to ensure the trade, obviously. Peace and security comes as number one. And of course, for any activity to take place, peace is key and security for the people. So if EC is bringing DRC on board, the first question they should ask themselves is, are we going to be safe? Is our peace still a priority? Our citizens safe? So me, I think it is okay. The East African community can sit down as a body. What I would disagree with is like intervening individually, like maybe let's say Uganda, going in to help DRC on an independent basis. Me, I would suggest they should sit down as a body, maybe from like a body, security body, to say in case of this and this, this is a body that is in charge of intervening to help out on the outbreak. Let's say maybe South Sudan has something. What are you going to do? You sit as a community, as East African community, not as independent states. So with that, it will be easier for them to resolve a conflict as a body, not on individual basis.
Okay, yes, Ricky, and then Jerome.
I think on that matter, Mackline makes a good point, but the question is, who makes up, let's say this body is actually the East African Army. Who makes up the East African Army? I'm thinking it's going to be a group of Ugandans, Kenyans, Tanzanians, Rwandans, Burundians, South Sudanese, and including people from DRC, making up an army. So question is, where does your allegiance lie if you're part of this army? Are you part of the East African Army fighting for the East African Army, or you're part of DRC because you're a citizen of DRC if you're also part of this army? So there is the idea of allegiance that has to be taken into account in forming such a group. Then secondly, also, are we yet at a point as East African community of having common interests and goals that supersede individual profit? Because that has to be taken into account. We know Uganda makes money off Kenya from the different exports. We know Kenya makes money off Uganda from the different imports. Because Uganda as a landlocked country obviously has to survive on these other two. And them not having certain resources that we do, they have to survive on us. So there is that mutual interest that is upheld by the idea of profit. We saw in the time when Rwanda closed off its border, how much Ugandans suffered, but then also how much Rwandans suffered as well. Because the cutting off of that trade in a way had to stop certain things, goods or certain prices of goods went up. Ugandans were facing losses in massive counts. So things like profit, how much are we willing to supersede these things and look at peace in its entirety? Because right now, peace is backed up by the fact that if there is peace, then trade can succeed. So without looking at trade as the precede of peace, what else can we look at? So those two things have to be taken into account before we look at the idea of having a common army or a common objective that if someone is at war, this particular army is the one to go in. So, yeah.
Okay, yes, Jerome.
I know. I think yeah, been answered in a way, but like extent, and it's amazing. Though me, I would add on a bit on that, or to add on what Maki had said earlier, or my panel Maki had said earlier on. It is how Kenya made a mistake in its own when they were about to make a requisition or a form of talk with the M23 rebels, and then Kenya said it's good for go ahead to take in a military stand. It was Kenya's own individual choice that it's supposed to do so. And in a way, I feel it has created even more of the conflict or the tension between Congo and Rwanda. And the suggestion of the build up of an East African Community Army. Yes, a very good idea. No, because we have seen the East African communities, the third time it is on, and that army, how well is it, as the panelist had said, where is its allegiance going to be? Which priority is the army going to have? Because not all conflict, let's say the Congo conflict has ended, that army is going to remain stagnant. Who is going to fund it? Who is going to maintain it?
Okay, let me ask you just there, Jerome. So, in a situation where when a country intervenes individually, then they enter into a conflict with the country that they have, they have intervened in. Don't you think such a scenario would be resolved by having a joint army? Because I remember the proposal for a joint army came from Kenya as well. The former president Uhuru Kenyatta
Yes.
proposed it. So don't you think that kind of scenario where you intervene now, Congo is accusing Rwanda of sponsoring M23. So if we have a joint army that sort of maybe the EAC summit sits and says our army has to intervene in this conflict, don't you
Yes.
think it would resolve such a scenario?
It would, definitely it would. Like, if an army is there, the security and the peace within the East African communities will be set. However, the problem still remains, as finalist Ricky had said, where will your allegiance be? Because you may still stand in, yes, we may fight the conflict. We may cool down the rift between maybe Congo and Kenya, or Kenya and Congo, or Kenya and Uganda. But then whom am I going to now base my allegiance to in the community? Because the integration at times may be really just because of trade and all. Doesn't necessarily mean we are perfect or friends. It may dwindle at any moment, so it's a shaky ground.
Okay, let me actually start with Ricky since he introduced the allegiance discussion. Before I go back to Mackline, must there be an allegiance for the East African Army? Should they ally with anybody?
Now, that's a very good question. Must there be an allegiance is a question. But then also, is it something that can be avoided? Remember, you're not born into East Africa, you're born into your country. At least from this standing right now, that I'm born Ugandan, and probably one day I'll train and join the East African Army in case it's born. So when I join the East African Army, ideally I am Ugandan. So in case the East African board sits and they're like, Uganda is at conflict and I do not agree with whichever government is serving, and we feel like, okay, this government should go, but then I have to fight on behalf of that government, assuming that's the protocol. Where does my allegiance lie? Because it goes down to the question of what came first, did the egg or the chicken? But this case, I think it's already answered. Yeah, so that aside, allegiance is obviously something that may not be avoided at the moment. But then also, question I had for Jerome, I think, was, no, Denise, shall I introduce this? The idea that which country, if a country was, if Uganda went in to fight on behalf of or to intervene in the conflict in DRC for whichever party decides, then who is at war? Like if that ends up conflicting between DRC and Uganda, does the EAC come in again to help that conflict between them, or it also has to sit back? Because right now it feels like everyone can do what they want with or without being part of EAC, and still EAC will not have much to do in resolving the conflicts even within the East African community itself.
Very
So
true.
before we go ahead to talk about the idea that, okay, let EAC go in to help the conflicts in DRC, has EAC been able to set up measures to resolve conflicts within the East African communities? First.
Okay, let's have Mackline and then Denise.
Yeah, I wanted to answer Ricky's question and Jerome of the allegiance, where does it lie? Yeah, to me, I think if this East African army is formed, first of all, like you said, their agreements, their objectives, they also have as a body. So by the time you come to join the body of the East African army, you're serving the East African army. So in case of anything, it is a East African community that orders you to do this. And it is so hard, by the way, Rick was talking about how you could be like you're royal to your own country. It is hard because this is not an individual decision. It is a whole group decision. So me, I think it is going to be so easy for the East African community to intervene with one body than the individual.
Okay, we are going to take a short break at this moment, and we'll still come back with students of Mbarara University of Science and Technology discussing the conflict in the DRC.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media, or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back from that short break. We are still with students of Mbarara University of Science and Technology discussing the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo and its impact on the regional integration. So before we took that short break, we were bringing in Denise into the discussion. So we'll start with you, Denise.
All right. I think from the first half of our discussion, we have really come up with very interesting ideas. But I think one of the things I would want to pinpoint and answer the question from Ricky about what are the benefits with having EAC as a whole engaging or member states engaging on behalf of the other. So I think at the end of the day, what we want is we want peace in DRC. So what is the environment, or what would I call it? What is the situation when I intervene as a whole, EAC, and when a member state comes in? So you see at the end of the day, this is what you're trading off for the other. For example, when you have EAC engaging as a whole, it means we are having all the member states, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda and Burundi coming together, even DRC, and saying, well, we want to stop the conflict in DRC. That means the burden they have entirely means I'm going to get a portion from here, get a portion from the other side and everywhere. It means on the burden of resources, that means it's equally shared. On the step, when we look at accountability, it means this EAC body as a whole has to give some sort of accountability to the events that took place in Democratic Republic of Congo. It means at a point where DRC comes up in some way or that can happen and says, well, you guys came here to fight for us, but you exploited us. That is a point, and the EAC as a bloc is accountable. Versus a scenario where we have a member state as Uganda intervening, or as Kenya or any other country, it means I can go to intervene on behalf of DRC, right? Of course, I want to fight for them, but it does not mandate me to give anyone accountability. It means I can come on genuine grounds of wanting to solve the conflict, I help out the government and we solve the conflict. Secondly, it also means I can come on with my selfish motives. I'm going to help you out, but you have a trade-off. It means I help you out here, I take some gold. I help you out here, I get some copper, I get some cobalt. So it means in a situation like that, we might fail on terms of accountability. And also on grounds of burden, it means that Uganda has a burden to fund its army, to generate the resources, put them there, maintain them there to a particular period until when this conflict has ended. So it means at the end of that day, it's going to be what I would call, it's going to be cost intensive for them. They have to sustain the army. And also there's no guarantee that you're not very sure that Uganda is here on a genuine card or on a selfish motive card, versus where we have EAC block collecting all of you and saying we are going to fight. I have accountability, that is number one, and the burden is equally shared. Because at the end of that day, it all goes back to the mutual interest from both parties, especially when it comes to nations. Many nations intervene where they benefit. It's not that, of course, if it's independent, many times you have some long-term benefit you're looking at, or maybe this potential threat will cross over to me. So I see when we engage the EAC bloc and we get, let me say, like an army which we haven't yet formed, we shall have better results. Because the problem we have is Uganda has been burdened over the years with intervening for South Sudan, intervening for Somalia, intervening for the refugees that stay here. But EAC hasn't come up because we do not have, let me say, like a body, rather an army that can gun fight. So it means there's that missing piece. So what we need to fill that gap would be EAC making intentional decisions that look at solving the conflict, maybe forming an army and a body that is tracking, compared to a country like Uganda being burdened with all these things, supporting the refugees, supporting South Sudan, supporting Somalia. So in both worlds, of course, at the end of the day, EAC hasn't done what it's supposed to do, but we should opt for a world where all of these member states come in, we share the burden and we share the burdens to solve this conflict, compared to a member state being burdened with all these things. And if you leave it at member state level, it means even those that have selfish motives, even those that want to exploit can come in. So you have no accountability and limitation.
Okay, Denise, just a question right
Yes.
in there. So the ideas that you are advancing have also been advanced by heads of state of these countries. Now, my question is, why do you think that up to now, we don't have a standing army for the EAC, even when it was proposed by the former President Uhuru Kenyatta? What could be some of the reasons why the EAC has not formed one?
I think some of the reasons to why the EAC hasn't formed one is, it might be from all its entire member states, is how intentional are they in solving the different crises that exist. So if the question of being intentional is solved, like let me say a country, of course, your neighbor is here. I think some of them just, of course, they are there, they join, these ideas come up, but the being intentional and implementation, it's where it all fails. Because at the end of the day, they are not, they're just there, they're at crossroads. So that shifts the burden to someone else. So I feel if these different countries, of course, these brilliant ideas have come up, if these different countries would be intentional and define the terms on which they're engaging and lay down certain things, and the goal is clear and they lay down these certain things, because at the end of the day, many of them are at crossroads of maybe these are the resources I'm investing in, something of the sort. If we would get a mutual ground on which these countries, all of them would come up, because if you subscribe to the EAC and such let me say a motion, or this is passed, you should be in a position to engage because you subscribe to the EAC. So I feel like there's that bit of, it's not really intentional from all the countries. It doesn't really, the EAC has failed in that bit to make it a mandate to these countries to subscribe to certain things.
Yes, Ricky.
I want to answer that question. Intention aside, my question is, do we have the need for it? Because in as much as it is an idea that has been advanced before and an idea that's been contemplated, do we need an army to actually fight on behalf of EAC when member states have individual armies? I'll take you back in history. Nazi Germany was fought by a group of spies from the United States, spies from Britain, spies from different countries within Europe. And Nazi Germany was eventually won when all these parties came together and decided, okay, in as much as we are individuals from different places of the world, we are still going to fight a similar battle not with a united army, but at least with united ideas and a united force. So question is, do we really need this, or can we simply borrow what's already in history? Because I'll take you back to the idea that after Nazi Germany was fought, there was Americans fighting the Soviet Union. Soviet Union was a war that went on for even way past the existence of the Soviet Union into the Cold War. And these people fought on their own. And we see the length of time that it took for the Americans to actually fight off the Soviet Union versus the time it took the different Europeans to fight off Nazi Germany with the help of the United States and different Caribbean nations. So the idea of, do we need a united army for us to fight a war, or do we need individuals to simply chip in at any resources they have? This could be in manpower, it could be in any weaponry that may be used. This can be done even without the army. So I think regardless of the hesitance to create this army, even the idea of need is still lacking. I feel like we need to make a better, if we actually need it, then someone must make a better argument for it.
Okay, so let's see what Jerome has to say, or if he's going to make a better argument for it.
No, I'm just actually adding on what Panariki had said. Moving away from intention, I might have the intention to form the army. That's what they have. Kenya proposed it. It's there. I have the intention to form the army. But as Ricky had said, is there a need for it, or do the people need it? It also runs back to the priority. What is the priority of the East African community states? Why did they form the East African community? They say they formed the East African community because they want peace, they want settlement, they want a monetary fund, they want something better. But if you formed it, then what is your priority? Do you want the East African community to sustain and build and become bigger, or you want to maintain it just at a level it is? The priorities between the different East African countries is lacking. They don't have a constant priority. That means in case Denise came to me and asked me, I need to build up an army, I'll look at it and be like, yes, it's a very good idea. I'll write it even on my book and be like, it's a very good idea. But I'll go back to my country, sit down.
So Jerome, with the conflict in Congo,
Yes.
that has over 122 rebel groups,
Yes.
it has taken Congo over 25 years, and they don't look like they are about to
Yes.
end the conflicts. Don't you see a need for such an army? Because it's also what I wanted to ask Ricky earlier, that with what is happening in Congo, don't you think there is a sort of a justification? Because the rebel groups keep on multiplying.
For that, there is a need for it. But it's not going, but with the general standing of the different East African communities, I don't think it will really stand for long. So it's better for the countries themselves to rally up as individual countries to form up a joint united country for now, a joint united army for now, to cater for the situation that is going on in what? In DRC, cool down the conflict and stabilize it, and then things can go back. Because with the priorities within the different East African countries and how they are trying to level up themselves, even the minor details, the constant conflicts, they are not so much abbreviated, but they are there. Simple. But that is now, it creates an issue that even if we are to form up an army, it will now create more issues of who will lead them, who will become the general, or something like that. But we don't want that part now. So the best way to handle that Congo conflict is just let the countries rally up themselves to bring in a pitch in within the different armies they have, solve the conflict, and then we can continue. Then the intention of where to form up that East African community country will come in if they are ready for it.
Okay, yes, Mackline.
I had the same idea, but you asked Denise about why haven't they formed the army yet someone proposed it. To me, I think this goes back to self-interest as countries. I think the individual East African countries have their own personal motives for DRC, because they think if we come up as a East African community to help, it is not going to benefit them as individual countries. So I think that one is one of the reasons why it is delaying the formation of the army. So Me, I think the East African community should make its intentions clear as East African community. No one, of course, they're supposed to be they're supposed to be helping, but someone proposes something that they all know it is going to help, but they are
And their presidents formed a summit.
exactly, but they're actually not doing it. But because they know if now I go in, okay, as if we go in as a whole, we're not going to benefit. But if I go in as Uganda, take an example of Uganda, maybe I'm going to help and then demand for something in return. So I think that is one of the reasons why we are still seeing a lot of chaos in DRC. And if the East African community doesn't make its objectives and intentions clear, we're going to see that happening over and over again.
Okay, let me have Ricky last on that topic and we move on to something else.
That notwithstanding, I think we also need to give credit to the East African community not to intervene. Because, as I said earlier in my discussion, is the idea that who are the rebels that we are fighting? And the simple truth is that the rebels are citizens of DRC. Normal citizens, not trained soldiers, not... Of course, we have to keep in mind the idea that these are people holding guns, and that kind of changes the state of things, but these are still citizens. So you deciding somewhere outside that country that, okay, you're going to go intervene with a group of soldiers also might imply something different. That because you're not going to fight soldiers who have gone wrong, you're going to fight actual citizens holding guns. So that might be interpreted as a massacre, because how do you differentiate a rebel from a citizen? How do you, because they don't have gun policies, what if I'm a citizen holding a gun as well and I'm not a rebel? So there is that idea that there's no clarity as to who the enemy is, because it is simply an estimation that they have 122 groups formed since the past 25 years, but does not tell us exactly who the rebel is and who is not the rebel. They do not locate them and say, oh, the rebels are located here and this is how the operation works. Such information is not made public, or such information is not shared yet. Therefore, we have to keep in mind that in as much as we want to go in and help, assuming that's how the East African heart is, the idea has to go to who are you fighting? And secondly, what are you fighting for? Because selfish gains aside, we need to have a clear motive as to why are we ending the conflict and how should we end it. Because the why might be clear, but that how has to be agreed upon by very many parties. And we also need to be ready to take on the consequences that shall come thereafter.
Okay, thank you. Let me get back to Jerome.
Yes, please.
So let's talk about how countries enter into the EAC.
Yes, please.
Now, the EAC that we have right now, the treaty came in place in 1999 with Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania.
Yes.
Later, we saw Rwanda and Burundi joining in, then Congo. Yes, and then we later saw South Sudan, and now Somalia says, hey, I'm also part of you. So when we see the late entrance into the EAC, at the time they entered, they all had war. They all had conflicts ongoing. Now Somalia has conflicts ongoing and it wants to join. My question is, when EAC takes on these countries which are fully infested with conflicts, don't you think it's taking more than it can chew?
True. Actually, it's trying to fight a lion. Honestly, like, I'm still trying to make sense of why the East African community has been accepting countries that are full of conflicts. Maybe they had the idea that I solve the conflict, it joins me, and that country has like a debt kind of situation that it should be having within the community. But in the long run, that is very detrimental. It is why even the priorities of the different countries, like, we don't have a clear goal to why we want the East African community. That means if we are letting in countries that are having conflicts their own, our priorities, instead of going out to create a stable trade function that is going to be probably rival the European Union, or rival SADC, or rival any other integrated community, we're instead going to rival ourselves in conflict resolution, not trade resolution. It is funny. Somalia has had a long period. I think ever since I was young, I would be watching news. My parents would force me to watch news. You're watching Al Jazeera, Somalia is fighting, Somalia is fighting, Somalia is fighting. And I look at it, and we have a Congo issue right now. We still don't know how we are going to handle it. Somalia wants to join in, and it has a serious issue with terrorism and war. If by the time a mere simple conflict, because the conflict here is just a simple rebel, and these are, like Ricky has said, probably civilians who don't know how to use guns well. Somalis just said,
The ones in Congo, are they civilians who don't know how to use guns well?
it's my perspective. It's my perspective and view. But
Okay. And I totally respect it.
But the side of Somalia, at least from the way I've been seeing it from the books, from the news and what, they've been training themselves. It's like, I wake up today, it is war. Leave this guerrilla war.
And making terrorist attacks, actually.
Exactly. It is you're not having this guerrilla warfare that is happening in Somalia. I come and I attack a simple village and scatter. No, there are people out there releasing cannons. They're really fighting guns. Uganda has also sent an army to fight there, and still even our own people are dying in trying to solve that thing. Then it wants to join the East African community. Best it first handles its issue and calm itself, if it is to join the East African community. Because if East African community decides to accept it, well, we are accepting war in its full package. That means we have to solve that issue. In the long run, our economy is going to dwindle, and in the process, yeah, we are going to break the East African community again, and then we shall think of reviving it, and the cycle will continue.
Okay, yes, Denise. Issue of new entrants. Jerome says no. This one with war first resolve your conflict. Now, for the case of Somalia,
Yes.
when ESC decided to fast track its application, the president of Somalia stated, you know, you guys, we have a long history with you. We were the ones doing horse riding. Indian coolies just came to build the railway. We have been with you.
Yes.
But on top of that, they come with trade.
Yes.
Oil. You know, they own a lot of petrol stations in Uganda.
Yes.
So, on one hand, they come with trade, they claim we have a long history with them. On the other hand, they have conflict. Do you think it's fair to go with Jerome's idea and say, first resolve your conflict?
I think maybe the predicament the ESC might be in is many times when you're talking about nations, of course, you're talking about mutual benefits for you, for both of you. You're talking about basically benefit of your own civilians in the other country, and the reverse is true when the other people come here. So I think many times, if it comes to accepting countries, maybe they haven't really analyzed maybe they have, but they haven't really haven't had an in-depth thought about the implication of let me get the first case of taking in a country that has conflicts and war. Because if a country, I would presume if a country is a part of the ESC and they have conflict and war, it becomes a burden for the ESC to make sure one of its member states is at peace. Of course, you're looking at other benefits that might come in with that country, like you have given, best case scenario, you have given Somalia having the petrol stations and everything. Of course, those are benefits. But it would be, I think it would be an upfront thing that if I come in with my war, it means all those enemies I had are also now going to become your enemies because you have taken me in. So that means that is going to become the new ESC's burden because it has taken in a country that has conflict to kind of intervene and resolve these conflicts. But on many occasions, I don't think ESC has intervened. It has been normally member states fighting for Somalia.
Actually,
like
that was going to be my next question.
Exactly.
So you can as well tackle it.
Yeah, it has been normally member states fighting or pitching in, helping Somalia, South Sudan and everything. So it means on that first case, which would have been what I would have called a logic way, that you come, your enemies, they have also now become your enemies. You have to fight and do what? Support them. So it means now on that ground, I think the ESC hasn't really addressed that. Now it goes on what would be benefiting. Because up to right now, I think even when there was conflict in South Sudan, trade was still taking place. Still, Ugandan goods would enter, some lorry drivers, trailer drivers would be killed. So that means at the end of the day, I think they have failed to find a balance that can secure their interests, and the interests, of course, maybe these interests over trade, petrol stations is weighing more than maybe the conflict, and where they're like, it will stay that side. But then at the end of the day, it's not a guarantee that this cannot come to your country. Because it can potentially, the conflict can also come to your country, because the enemies of the other people can potentially become your enemies. So I think it shouldn't, ideally, they shouldn't take in states that have conflict. But if they feel the interests like trade and oil and petrol stations outweigh the conflict, then let them have the burden to assist the other people.
Yes, Mackline, what is your perspective?
Yeah, I think they should not take in the countries with that are under the conflict, but the countries can help individually. Like, okay, East African countries can help Somalia individually. Say Uganda can go in and offer hand of help. Then after helping Somalia resolve their conflict, they can now bring it on board. Because I'm looking at, for example, we already have, as we talked about the DRC case, it's in the East African community, but they're not handling that burden. Now you bring it on another burden, which is going to really expand. And the next time we know, some other country also has a burden. So the conflicts are going to be so many and so hard for the community to handle as a body. So I think they should, the East African community states should intervene individually, not before bringing it in, should intervene and help the country, but not bring it on board.
Okay, let me push this to Ricky. So Ricky, on the issue of intervention, now, does it even affect EAC if these countries join with conflicts? Because we are looking at, does EAC do anything to resolve the conflicts?
I think on paper, yes, it does affect. On paper, and I still maintain on paper that it does affect, because one of the things I'm conflicted about right now personally is the idea that what would happen if ESC, instead of admitting these people to join the ESC, rather ESC as a bloc goes ahead to intervene in these countries? Because the same way Somalia made a request to Uganda to take on refugees during the time of conflict, could be the similar way Somalia would request ESC to step in. Because why would an individual country step in yet it subscribes to a bloc that can actually intervene on the behalf of the country that needs to? Secondly, it is my personal take, that before we admit them, we'd rather step in and help them. Because what's the point of taking them on with their burdens, yet we are not willing to help them? Let's rather allocate some resources to help. If it needs manpower, look at a country that can spare some army members. Look at a country that can spare part of its budget to this disaster preparedness. Because I mean, what are we using the money for? But yes, that is something we can look at. Let us intervene as ESC. But then on the other hand, it's a question of which country in the ESC currently is immune to conflict. We might say Uganda is not at war right now. Kenya is not at war, but at some point in our history, we can pinpoint moments, even when we were part of ESC, that were on the brink of war. For example, Kenya, I think in the 2012 elections, I'm not sure, there's that time when there's a whole tribalistic war that was raging in Kenya. People were leaving the country. People were scared for their lives. In the previous election in Uganda here, it felt like we were suffocated by our own government, in as much as I believe it was in a bid to protect the elections, allegedly. But there is still the concept that none of us is immune to conflict. So when we cannot solve our own conflict, then let us at least try to solve the conflicts of those people before we admit them, because we also acknowledge that at any one point, ESC would have to fight our wars as part of the members, since we're already part of it.
Okay. Yes, Jerome, as you come in, I also have a question for you.
Yes, please.
We are here discussing how the conflicts have been in this country. Now, I would like us to look at a solution-based part of it on behalf of EAC, because there should be some sort of benefits for joining EAC when conflicts arise in your country. So how best should EAC, I don't mean Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania individually, but what should EAC do, or should we continuously sit as EAC and handle other matters and pretend there are no conflicts?
Okay. Before I answer that, I wanted to first contribute to Ricky's point
Yes, please
of
do.
countries have all experienced. We're not immune to conflicts. That is very highly true. Even us as individuals, we're not immune to those conflicts. But the level at which you handle those conflicts gives you a guarantee of how best you are. Kenya may have had those tribal issues, but it managed to cool it down and it's back to stability. Uganda may be having electoral issues, allegedly, but they are still being handled. Like, they've handled them and we are back to what? We're back to our daily lives. Somalia, as I've said, ever since childhood, I've been seeing it with war. Either, if not a terrorist attack, it has some random attack or something. It means it has been having war throughout a long time. Even if we're bringing in, like, as us to come and help in to fight the conflict, that thing has gone on for a very, very long time. It means this is now beyond a conflict itself. You really need intervention, and for us to join in, it means for us to join in with you to handle this, it's going to be very disastrous on us. So we have to go as individuals to try to help Somalia before it can enter the East African community. But East African community cannot admit Somalia right now. It is not ready for Somalia. That's the general fact.
Okay, then to my question.
Then to your question, how East African community can solve its own problems. One is it has to first understand its priorities. Because East African community, even during history, before it even developed itself, the major issue that made it break is none of the countries knew exactly what they wanted. They formed up an integration for economies and to build up. Yes, I accept it has brought up advances. We can move into various countries with just a national ID. We are experiencing trade, but that is not enough. Like, you formed a community that wants to build and maybe have a kind of economic stand and to build themselves better, to build in objective. It has a monetary, it wants to form up a single monetary thing, a single currency. You see, it has not managed to do that. We could probably use the Kenya shillings to start in as a way of building up the currency into one, because Kenya shillings has a better stand than Uganda's or Tanzania's. You're seeing, but none of them is looking at it in that perspective. All they are looking at is individual interests within the community. It is that destroys the functionality of why even you integrated in the first place. You may be undergoing a situation that you want to build up your friends together. We may be friends. Take it for example, I'm a friend to Ricky, I'm a friend to Madrine, I'm a friend to Maki. But when we share a common goal, let's say debate is our common goal, we shall sit down, shout together, fight, but we still reach a consensus that this is what we are supposed to do, which East African community is lacking. And they should manage to do that. The moment they set their priorities right, of maybe this is me, Uganda, and I have this kind of ability to produce because we are good with agriculture. That means I will handle agriculture and do my best to produce that can handle the different countries. Kenya will handle exports because it's the best place for exports since it's near the port throughout China and the other side. Rwanda can handle a bit of agriculture since it's landlocked, but it has a good foundation. You notice that those priorities come in and later builds the community in itself. With that, it later on creates a situation where we can establish now Kiswahili as the language. Because if trade is continuous, the language comes in, the currency comes in, and it will solve the issues that East African community is experiencing.
Okay. Now, let me move to Denise. Let's talk about international intervention.
Yes.
We saw the president of Congo crying out to the former prime minister of Britain. So, do you think EAC should allow international intervention from states outside EAC or even outside Africa in its affairs, especially conflict resolution?
I think a call like that for a body like ESC would have very unpromising unpromising outcomes in the long run, because let me say, like, DRC is the youngest member. Before even attempting to solve, if you say I cannot, before attempting to solve something, you say I cannot. If that would be the position ESC would be in right now, if it gave room for international intervention. So I suggest before we go for into calling the international intervention, ESC as a body should come to a mutual understanding that at the end of the day, if it stood and accepted these member states, before it looks for help elsewhere, it took them in with the burdens they had. And of course, some benefits that exist around there. Then it should be in position to intervene. Because when they choose to give the international people the power, it means they have it as ESC as a bloc will come off as a weak bloc. And you would start questioning what were the objectives in the first place of having a bloc with over 7 countries that cannot intervene to solve a problem of one country. So at the end of the day, the integration itself becomes useless, because we first come to an integration for you to help us out in case anything fails. Before I look far away and I go to across Africa, at least if I subscribe to this body and we agree to the terms and conditions, then you should pitch in for me when I need your help. So giving authority to the international bodies or anything to intervene at a time where ESC hasn't done anything is not a call it should make right now. True. If it has taken you in with your burden, let it make an initiative to make a call. Let it make initiatives that are going to be impactful, implement them with intentions to reduce these conflicts and solve such problems. Otherwise, saying no to that and choosing the intervention by international bodies will just reflect that the entire Great Lakes region cannot entirely sustain itself. And probably that comes with a lot of things. It means these people, since they cannot help out themselves, any international body that feels at one particular point, if maybe Uganda makes out a cry or another country makes out a cry, they'll just come in and intervene. So it means ESC should take up the mantle and first try to solve the problems of its member states as long as they subscribe to it.
Okay, let's have Mackline and then we'll get back to Ricky and Jerome.
Yeah, I think ESC should not immediately call for help from any outside body like UN or any other body outside, because what ESC needs to do is sit down, revise their priorities as a body, and find a way forward. Maybe if they have really failed as a body, they have tried all means, like we're talking about forming the East African Army. If they sit and do that, look at different options before calling out for help. Because I'm looking at this aspect of, if you're inviting any other outside body, we are calling for now colonialism. Let me bring it back to that. Because they're going to bring in UN, which is going to also come with intentions.
So
now,
this time you're saying come colonize us.
Exactly, come colonize us. And we're trying to be independent. It is an independent body. So I would really suggest that ESC should sit down as a community, as a body, revise the objectives, revise the intentions, know where the weaknesses are, because before you fight something, you have to know the root cause. Why are we failing here and here? Let them sit on table, revise their weaknesses, know this is where we have gone wrong, strengthen those points, and move out help before calling for any other intervention.
Okay, yes, Ricky. Over 25 years, can ESC or Congo still handle?
Yeah. My answer is yes. For one reason, I will not differ very much from my panelists, but the idea is that we have to consider what is the problem in DRC, because the problem does not necessarily stem from the fact that we have very bad governance. 25 years, been a very long time for you to have very bad governance without growth or anything. But we've seen roads constructed in that time. They don't have the best roads, but at least they have roads. They don't have the best healthcare, but they do have healthcare. They don't have the best or safest schools, but they do have them. So I don't think they have the worst governance. But then the idea for me, the one thing that keeps ringing in my mind is the idea of the weaponry that these people have. I don't think I can walk 5 blocks in Uganda and find a gun. It's quite different. So
It's something we majorly see with the army.
yes,
Or
Yeah.
security
exactly,
guards.
something like that.
Exactly.
So the idea that civilians today can get frustrated and wake up and tomorrow they are well equipped to go fight whichever government is at play is something that should be alarming. And I think this draws back to the idea of the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution came, so many goods were produced more than Europe could consume, hence the birth of slave trade, whereby surplus goods were shipped off to Africans who did not know much and are very fascinated by the little things, and lo and behold, was selling ourselves to the devil to whichever price that was. I think it's the same thing with the case, with the case of DRC, that people are now producing guns, weaponry in excess, to the point that so much more is left unused and unconsumed, so that anyone willing to take it on, because of whichever circumstances, they will sell to you whichever they have. Because I'm thinking that is what's happening there. So going down to the idea of sourcing out, if at all ESC was to intervene, or even DRC itself was to intervene and do proper border control and decide to cut off supply of guns, supply of bombs, whatever, whichever it is that they're using to fight, I think it will give them a fighting chance. So I think ESC and DRC can actually do this. But on the idea of giving out a call, even if we are not able to do it as ESC and DRC is not able to do it, we need to pick and choose. Pick your battles. Pick your enemies and friends, because I don't believe very many people out there actually want to see the peace come at play because of the gain that might be lost in trade for peace. So picking who is willing to fight for the peace and who is willing to fight for the commodities and trade, and you decide whether whichever person you're comfortable with, you might choose to trade off something. We've traded so much in Uganda for just the peace, and we are okay living the way we are. I believe DRC can come to a similar conclusion if at all that's how they want to swing.
Okay, so let's have Jerome and we wind up this discussion.
Okay, yes. In the question that you had forwarded to Maki about the international call by DRC, I think they are creating, I call it a repeat of history of themselves again. Because if they call international intervention, it's international intervention that started part of their conflicts in the first place. So them calling international intervention again is the same as them saying we're going to call more conflict to come in a different form. But again, it's conflict to build itself. And that means as ESC, it hasn't really gone to its depths to really handle the issue. It is just looking at it like a sideline, like the way one of the UN statements said in the UN refugee statements, Congo has been one of the most left out countries in terms of refugees and in terms of persons. And the fact that each and every country just looks at it like that, it means ESC has not yet done anything yet to handle it. So its call for international intervention is not yet right. And this is just my personal opinion, but DRC can handle this conflict itself. Like, first leaving out even the intervention of East African community itself or other countries, it as a country itself, it can handle it. What is lacking is just the ability to reach a consensus with the people who are fighting with themselves, because it's civilians. It is not army members. Let them sit down as a country, lock themselves there and handle it.
Okay, so thank you so much. We have come to the end of our discussion for today. So we'll have concluding remarks briefly in less than 30 seconds. I'll start with Ricky.
For me, I think the most important thing we need to remember is that each war comes with casualties, and most of these casualties are the refugees, and we cannot forget who they are. These are people living in camps which are very much populated, very low health care settings, very low resources of living and sharing very many unshareable spaces including toilets and things like that. So I think we need to remember these are the people that are actually affected by war. And in as much as profit is at hand, we need to remember that humanity should supersede all these other things.
Okay, Mackline.
Yeah, thank you so much. In regard to the discussion, my remarks would be, yeah, as the East African community, you need to sit down, prioritize, give priority where it is needed. And as Ricky said, humanity comes first. So I believe if East African community sits and comes together, they can resolve the conflict in DRC, or DRC itself, as Jerome said, can lock
Close itself.
inside and resolve the conflict.
Yes, Denise.
Concluding, I think DRC as a nation over the years has struggled a lot. So if it has, on an assumption that it has sat down all those years and failed to resolve the conflicts, but it has just subscribed to the EAC, I feel like the EAC then should make it a priority to solve some of those conflicts and share the burden equally with the DRC.
Jerome.
Yeah, thank you. My final remarks are, as the leaders sit down and have very many conferences to understand their biased interests that seek no guidance or relation to how to handle the people that are suffering in the borders and the businesses lost, they should look back and try to look back in the humanity. We are people suffering with the simple conflicts that are going on. So they should prioritize, settle down, and put an end to death.
Okay. Thank you so much to our panelists for gracing our invitation. Thank you so much for the discussion.
Yeah,
Great
you're
job.
very
Thank you so
welcome.
much as well.
Okay. Thank you so much to Center for Constitutional Governance and Civic Space TV for organizing the inter-university debate. Thank you so much to our viewers for watching. Feel free to have your opinion and your say on this topic by putting it in the comment section or putting it on Twitter. Tag Civic Space TV, tag CCG, and put your discussion and your opinion out there. I would like to say from us, we say thank you. See you again next week, same time.